The deep thrumming of the dwarven song echoed throughout the cavern. For now the forces of the darkness had been pushed back and the sounds of battle were excluded to the very outskirts of the giant cave. Joseph did not dare relax, however, as the building pressure in his head had not ceased to press against the back of his eyes. Before him knelt 9 other stone priests, their heads bowed as they strung together the complicated melody that reached out into the stone, calling to it. It was a deep, resonant sound with the slow, ponderous notes that overlapped one another like a cross-section of sedimentary rock from the bottom of a lake. The living rock beneath them answered the call, causing pillars of hot magma to grow up from the floor like rapidly forming stalagmites. Grasped in tendrils of molten rock were shards of purple crystal. The pillars were already up and forming around the edges of the now shrinking rift. Only a few more feet would be needed to finish off the barrier, and then Joseph had a plan as to how to finish this masterpiece. Glancing at the rift, he saw arms, claws, tentacles, and talons sticking through, struggling to fight their way into the mortal realm, where they could become tangible and cause havoc among the living. For now the limbs were smoky and blurred, like something in one's peripheral vision, seen out of the corner of your eye. Some, however, were beginning to leave marks in the stone where they grazed the hard surface. Claw marks burned into the rock that caused his stomach to churn uncomfortably, threatening to betray him. Whenever a phantom limb drew close to one of the crystals embedded in the fast-forming rock barriers, it suddenly grew more real and threatened to burst through the rift into the real world. Whenever this happened, a group of dwarf warriors had been assigned to rush up and attack the now corporeal creature, either cutting off the limbs so it would slink back into the aether of the rift, or pull the creature into the world where its non-existent body could not sustain its physical limbs and would collapse into itself in a weight of paradoxes. Thorcum walked up to stand beside him, the ranger's obvious exhaustion evident in the way he used his long-handled axe as a walking stick. Joseph nodded his greeting. Thorcum responded in kind and grimaced at the effort. "The enemy be ready for its final push," the ranger whispered so as not to disturb the priest's singing. "It will nae be long now." Joseph nodded in response. He'd expected as much. If the barrier had proven effective, as it was doing now, it made sense that the darkness would make a final destructive attempt to try and stop the ritual before it could finish. "Are you thinking that this'll stop the creatures?" Thorcum asked, pointing to the crystal-studded border the priests were erecting with their song. Joseph sighed, not out of exasperation, but of resignation. "Once we have finished the border, we'll call down the stone on our heads. When the beasties try to come through, they'll be too real to pass through the stone. And if in the rift can be contained, they cannot expand it out to go around the rocks." "Are you not feared they'll dig through the rocks?" "Nay, we'll be pulling down the whole mountain atop of them. They'll ne'er get out of that." Joseph shook his head as he spoke, a deep melancholy settling into his voice. Thorcum gave a small start at his words. "That means," he began, but couldn't finish. "Aye, this be our tomb," Joseph responded without looking at the ranger. "But at least we'll be taking these bastards with us." "Is there no other way?" Joseph's voice sounded hollow. He knew the answer to that question. Joseph shook his head. "I have seen the twilight glade. There be nothing there that survived the rift. It'll be the same here, lest we stop at a cell." They both fell silent. The only remaining sound was that of the priests and their singing, interrupted occasionally by the shouts of the warriors watching the vortex. They were nearly done. Only a few feet separated the two ends of the molten archway that now spread across the whole of the rift itself. Joseph turned to Thorcum, opening his mouth as if to say something, when suddenly the shouting from the warriors grew louder. Joseph pivoted to face the sound and saw several creatures burst out of the rift. They were barely formed, gibbering piles of flesh and eyes. Some skittered out in the form of warped insects with barbed stingers, and another group seemed to be melted bodies built entirely out of misshapen blades, fused together to form a stumbling mass of sharp edges that staggered towards the kneeling forms of the stone priests. Joseph cried out and began running towards the phantom figures, but even as he did, he knew he wouldn't make it in time. The underdeveloped monsters flooded out of the rift, dying even as they formed into the mortal world, but even as they fell, their limbs thrashed about them, visiting death on all those around them, each one making it further towards their goal of the priests, whose song became faster, more urgent as the beasts came. It was not enough. With a series of snarls and cries of pain, the creatures crashed into the circle of priests, flailing about as they did so. Joseph raised his weapon and began smashing aside the already fading creatures, their reality spent in a short spurt of violence as they returned to the void from whence they came. Joseph continued to fight anyways. The creatures' bodies sizzled and dissipated in smoke upon their deaths, and as the final creatures vanished into the air, Joseph fell to his knees as he surveyed the carnage that they had wrought. All of the stone priests lay dead, their songs stopped by their already cooling lips. Joseph looked up and saw that only a few feet remained before the barrier would be complete. If the attack had come even minutes later, they would have finished. But even now the vortex was beginning to tear the arch apart. Quickly Joseph reached out to the stone and began to sing to it, urging it to once again form around the crystals and finish the barrier. In the distance he heard the sounds of battle begin again as the enemy on the far side of the cavern began their last, desperate push to reclaim the rift. The darkness's mortal allies threw themselves at the defenders with reckless abandon. Thorkim moved off to help his troops. Turning before he left, he shouted out to Joseph. "We'll hold them off for as long as we can," he bellowed. Joseph was too focused on his song to respond. Slowly the barrier began to inch closer towards completion. If the priests had survived, then the process would have been finished in mere minutes. Joseph's singing alone extended those short minutes into the better part of an hour. He only hoped that his soldiers and their allies could hold out long enough to give him that much time.